The Other Shore is a multi-tiered project. It'll be a virtual project that with an art object that people get to have at home, a installation and performance. This iteration right now that we're filming is for the virtual component of it, and it's premiering August 17th with Jacob's Pillow. Well, this project is a derivative of another piece that I started with Jacob's Pillow about 3 years ago. So we were going to redo that project, kind of further it with Jacob's Pillow, and then the pandemic happened, and the sort of like extremeness of the situation has allowed me and the collaborators to respond in a way and open up towards opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise, which I think is like what the virtual iteration of this project is offering. There's two different rooms. In this one room, this solo room, which is the beginning of the piece, there's a camera inside of the performance space, which really gives like a somewhat first-person, third-person experience, but also really makes it that, gives you an experience that you wouldn't be able to have in real life. The other room, where it's simulating, is filmed from the perspective of the audience laying on the floor.
So you're shifting their perspective and you're shifting their experience of viewing performance in such a way that it sort of sparks a lot of questions about who's the vulnerable ones. And so it's like a different way of viewing performance. The virtual version has a very physical, tangible component of it where the audience gets a box when they buy a ticket, and inside of the box, which the box becomes this like portal into the performance space. Inside of the box is a book that is kind of this guide and provides context, and then they scan this QR codes, and that's how they get into the virtual performance of it. I consider it an installation of two different worlds that are working in tandem next to each other as a way to sort of talk about different ways of both an internal experience and an external experience of growing in life.
I can speak for my solo, and that I'm shifting around the room a lot, but I'm using the audience and the camera as placeholders for these dynamics that I'm talking about in my life. I feel like in some ways if it was a person actually standing in front of me and I was like, you know, this close to them, it would be hard for me to be as vulnerable as I'm allowing myself to be. So I think in some ways it feels good for me to be able to share this vulnerability in such a safe way, that it's not a body in front of me, but I am fully aware that it is in time and space, and in a couple months from now, it's someone's eyes that I'm looking at. But it's cool, like I can allow myself to cry and I don't feel guilty that I'm crying right in front of someone's face.
Each part of this process, the box, the solo room, the bronze room, add to the next step for the audience member to become more comfortable with hearing our story, but also understanding that their story should be heard as well. It's like little breadcrumbs, you know, like you don't want to give people too much, but you also want to just make them feel comfortable at each step. But what's so fun about comfortability is that comfortability also involves being crazy. It involves being like smelly sometimes. It involves a lot. And so those boundaries are being broken, but with care. There's a lot of care involved in how people are about to receive us, but also how they should show, how they're gonna show themselves.
You know, as human beings, we share a lot of personal connections, and when you're with someone physically and you're looking them in the eye, you can relate just by that, and you have that connection. And when you're telling a story on stage and there's an audience, you can really feel the energy and that sort of empathy in the space. And as far as relating to a camera, there isn't that much of a physical human connection, but interesting enough, it does still feel very personal because you're literally like going into the camera and pulling back. So I think playing with that and also still just keeping in mind that that will be an audience, that will be a person, there is someone still there, is definitely something that I try to tap into each time I'm in the space and working with the camera.
What this space does that a proscenium stage doesn't do is that it allows you to actually be able to dance in the 360. All of the angles are being seen, so you get to really almost smear yourself over the room. I love to feel bigger in this space, and this room helps feel that way because I feel like you're trying to like fill up the space, and it doesn't happen so much when it's flat.
I think the sense of place was really crucial, especially when they were making the text. A lot of the dancers would be like, I am imagining myself in the house where, you know, I grew up in like a particular room. And I think that like when we were doing some of the sessions on Zoom, we would start to refer to some of the movement based on like where they were positioned. When we were in the rehearsal room, we could start to reference like, you know, their home in Philadelphia or their home in Baltimore when they were 5 years old, or their, you know, like their Chiari's like home that he doesn't live in anymore. So I think that like, yeah, this idea of home or space, interior space really helped them make their like solo material for movement, but also was really helpful in like executing or speaking the text. Like they, you know, a lot of them, like I worked on, like they closed their eyes and tried to imagine themselves, you know, in the past.
We sort of agreed that it's less about music and more about like creating a texture that supports the visual environment and supports the dancers. You know, when you work with analog synthesizers, you're constantly creating new sounds and new voices that have never been heard before. And so being able to have that level of control, and it all feels like it is deeply tied to the movement and to the visual world.
How can we give folks something to help make their space feel more like even if it's not going to make it feel like a theater, but make them feel those sort of tactile and individual connections to the performers. And yeah, just to let them into the process. So to create a book that has images from our time here, from dancers past, and a processing of those images through collage and overwriting. And then to plan what it will be like once we get to invite people into this space.
This project is massive and beautiful, and it needs a community to build it, and I'm happy that it happened.
What is the sensation of being in a performance? What is the sensation of being in, like, with other people in space, either at a museum or installation or in a performance? And like, what are the constructs of that? What makes that up? And how can you try to get at that sensation, or create the conditions in which those sensations and those experiences can happen again?
It's about that duality of external experience and internal experience, and how can you give that both to the performers and also to viewers or audience.
Let's move a bit with the costume just for the movement.
So can we just kind of tell you the notes real quick, like